is May the 13th, 1998, and I am interviewing one of the more famous contract loggers on the coastal area of British Columbia by the name of Vivian Thomas Williams, commonly called Viv Williams. My name is Gerry Burch. I have this autobiography, Viv, and it indicates, of course, your birthplace and your early days, but it does indicate that one of your first jobs in 1934 was on a cat on the British properties.
When we went to work, I lived in Vancouver side, and we went over in the North Van Ferry, took the streetcar to the canyon there, and then walked across the canyon where the camp was just across the canyon, which is above Taylor Way, as you know, the area. And that's where we worked out, and we were starting to build the first roads and streets and whatever they are today, clearing the roads. But there was some pretty big timber that was still at that.
It wasn't the second growth at all.
No,
it was old growth.
Some of the old growth was still there.
Who was doing the logging?
Well, there wasn't any logging being physically. They were just following the right of way, and we were trying to bulldoze our way and yard the logs out of the way to get the road through.
It was mostly fir, of course.
Yes, big fir.
Big fir.
And we had 60 gas cats in there with a dozer on.
Oh.
See, I was at Deep Bay with Thompson and Clark for 3 years. That's where I got started in the woods, was after out here at the British properties. They shut us down in November. We got an early snowfall and so much rain, so they shut down. And I had come out, because I was originally with Mannix Construction out of Calgary. That's where I got all my experience. When I can show you pictures. I'm 12 years old when I left home and went to work. When I get the pictures, I'll show them.
They shouldn't have let you run a machine at that age.
Well, I tell you, I got the big Swede was the super, and he took a liking to me, and so in Cascat pulling the grader, things like that. I did drive mules for a few days on a dump wagon.
My God.
3 mules on a dump wagon, which I got some pictures too. But anyway, I was working for Fred Mannix, and they were short of bulldozer operators here when I first on this job up here. So Mannix sent out, one of the outfits had rented some cats too from him, and they come out and shipped them out by rail. And they got some bulldozer operators, and I was one of them that come out here. So when they shut the outfit down in the fall, in November, because of the snow and the rain, well, they headed right back to Calgary, and I happened to know a family here at the time, and married their daughter later. And so I went to visit them, and then at that time, of course, the old Morrison tractor, and then finished them, because when they shipped these cats out, we rebuilt cats and serviced them in the old CN freight yard buildings there right by the railroad track, and that's where Finning Tractor was located, you see. Yes. So that's how I got in contact with Finning, and with Morrison Tractor originally. You see, Morrison had it, and then he lost it, and then actually Earl Finning was the salesman for them at that time, and so the Caterpillar gave him the Caterpillar then.
Oh, yeah.
The following tape is the recording of an interview held with Viv Williams on March the 26th, 1990 by Arnold McCoombs.
In those days, this is back in the 30s, you know what the road was like then, and drove back up to Harrison and told George Mills that at that time, I guess I was considered because I'd come from Alberta from Mannix Construction, I had possibly more experience bulldozing and running cat than any of the other operators around, and so I went to work for George then. That changed the whole situation, and I could do no wrong as long as they sold out in 1939, and from then on I would say the white-haired boy for George Milburn after that episode. So they sure looked after me very well in those days. Thompson and Clark left Harrison Mills there in the 36,
they moved back over to Horn Lake.
Oh, no, I was gonna dig out
They
the book.
moved it, all their equipment back over to Horn Lake, and I moved back to the island with them, and while we were using bulldozers and shovels at Harrison Mills there on that road, building grade.
Didn't I make the comment in the book about Thompson and Clark being the first outfit, or one of the first outfits to use a bulldozer to build a grade or something?
That's what it was supposed to be. They bought this new diesel 75 Cat at the time, that was the first diesels that come out, and they bought it here in Vancouver and shipped it up there. I was supposedly the sixth man on the payroll when B&K were starting to rebuild the railroad for Canadian, whatever it is today, from the beach up to the lake.
This wasn't on the Charlottes.
No, we're talking about at Inglewood at the beach right now.
Yeah, right.
Before the railroad wasn't to go from Inglewood to the lower end of the lake. That railroad had a long time been abandoned. I run bulldozer at Powell River for Bob Goff and McNiven and Soros for a while, and in the meantime I had got in contact with the outfit which was going into Nimkish at that time to go up there, and I went up on New Year's Day 1942.
That wasn't Wooden English.
Wooden English were there yet, as they were still logging.
Oh, yes.
And they logged an incline above Beaver Cove at the same time and everything, if we were there. And then we were rebuilding the railroad back towards the lake. They brought in new International Harvester cats because of the connection the McCormick people had with that timber. They were able to get some new cats. You couldn't get caterpillars, so they got these new internationals. And I was living at the beach at the time, being a mechanic, more than I'd run bulldozer for a while. Another item that's happened then was that when I was at Powell River, Owen Henniger, who I think you're aware of today, was hooking on the cat that I was driving for Bob Goffin and McNiven and Soros, and his home was at Powell River. So when I got the job up at Inglewood, and we needed cat operators because he had more or less broke in on cats when he was working with me, and I got him to come up in February, March of 42 to Inglewood, and I stayed there until the spring of 43, and he stayed on and retired from there. And he became the area manager.
Yes.
From a cat operator to the area manager. And I went on to the Charlottes from there. I was asked, because they had a bunch of cats up at Pacific Mills Camp. Well, they didn't have a bunch, they had several. And at one time, they didn't have one that wasn't drowned in the chuck. The operators were not familiar with it, and they'd go out on the beach with a great big airplane spruce behind them, and instead of dropping the log and getting down with the cat and getting started to come out and then push the log in, they tried to pull it down to the water's edge, and in turn, of course, there's clam beaches, and by the time they decided to unhook the log and leave it there and then take a quick turn out, they sunk in the beach, and there they were. So I ended up being asked to go to the Charlottes, and for this job, and I had to go. And so I went up there, and the day I landed in the Charlottes, there was three cats that were in the salt chuck.
So it was 43 when you went there first with Pacific Mills, and you make reference to Huey Hodgins in here.
Yeah, well, I'd known it. Well, Otis Hallen and Hugh Hodgins, I've been friends with them for years and years.
But how did you meet Huey? Because he had worked for the Forest Service up till about 40.
Well, I met him during the war. You see, when
45.
He was into the Inter-Pacific Mills Company quite a lot. And when I first met Hugh, they had gone over an awful lot of the country up there, cataloging and just taken the choice logs out for the airplane spruce, and they left all the tops. And
where was this?
In Charlotte, in Skidegate.
In Skidegate.
And so after they had done all this, when Hugh come up on the first time I run into Hugh to really know him and work with him, he come up to go over all the roads that they had logged, cat roads I'm talking about, all in the area. And up behind in the Hana part of Charlotte, where they went further back than normal around the other beaches. And so he had their maps with him and everything, and I went with them, and they tallied up the timber that had to be taken out, because all they'd done is take the choice log out and left the rest. And so they wanted to get a handle on what timber was on the ground already fallen. It should be cleaned up sometime.
As you say, you were at Skidegate at first, and you were making up bundles, and then putting them into Davis rafts.
I'll give you a run of that. See, when I was down at Arrow, and I had this falling contract, so Northern Pulp decided they wanted to take those logs off of the east coast above Skidegate Village, off that pulp lease there. So George Fife was the super at Sandspit, and they were going to have a camp crew over, and so they put the cats in there. But first they gave me a falling contract, because I lived in Charlotte and I knew this was coming up, so I went to them and asked if I could get a contract for the falling. So there was, so I had a fellow by the name of Mills, and George Mills was his name, and the two of us went partnership on this deal as two sets of fallers to take this falling contract at Skidegate there, just about Skidegate. So we started in the spring, and they knew how much timber they wanted to take out, and so we started falling, and they were paying contract, and Charlie Hardy, local there, he was the scaler, and he scaled, and we got paid scale. Got in a crew with the cats, and they were just going to haul the logs out on the beach and dump them into a bag boom, and they were going to log this and nothing. George Fife was the super. So you know George or not?
No.
Well, anyway, so of course we living in Charlotte, living at home, and two sets of fallers, and we at that time we got some of the first distant chainsaws, the old IEL before, and then that year they come out with the Diston, and the 9-horse Diston, which was pretty good, and then we had some of the others before, and so we were down.
But there was some pretty big trees in there.
Oh, big, 9-10 feet on the stump.
You talk about even up to 14 feet.
Yeah, well, we've got several pictures, there's some big ones and everything there. Well, we were getting the timber down, and of course another thing that was quite unique in there was that there was a lot of broken off timber and everything, and the stumps had to be cut off. That was the rule. And of course we were making more out of stump scale than but we were doing good.
I forgot going back to the time when you were with Arrow there, you relate this funny story about the shortage of fallers, and you had to bring them out from Quebec. And the one story you relate is where a great big hollow cedar was being fallen, and one faller climbed inside it.
Yeah, well, this is it's up there near Skidegate Lake. There's great big cedars, and so of course these gutter. We talk about these French Canadians, but I tell you they're unique. And there was a fellow of this crew. There was 3-man crew, and they called the older of the fellow with the tall, and they called him Grand-Père. and he was the older than the others, but they called him grandpa because he was the boss, and the other, the bucker was a little short fella, and the second faller, of course, he wasn't too big, but so they had these cedars in their big hollow ones, and of course before that they were other way they were taking notches out and trying to get the thing to fall. Got to come along one day and the saw's going to be held, and these were these distant saws with a heavy head end and everything, and there was no way you could beaver tail with them or anything. And here's this guy going around the outside, and pretty soon the tree starts to fall, and I'm not right up to it, but I'm pretty close. And all of a sudden, out comes when the tree went over, the guy stands up, and he's in the middle of the stump.
Oh God! Workman's Compensation Board would sure.
But then another one of those same fallers was, we had Spear and Jackson saws, and of course there's those village motors and German motors.
Yes.
And of course they were the damnedest things. The flywheel there's a flywheel mag in them, and of course they open to the dust and everything else, and you never knew whether they were ever going to run or not. So we had moved this set of fallers up with the branch 10, and I was in charge of all the fallers, and so this day the Bannicky are so okay, but they were going to be a little further than where I could get to them very readily to look after them, so I give them 2 saws. And these were Spear and Jackson saws, you see, and so they took the 2 saws, so that if one broke down, they'd have another one. So it was pouring rain, and we get into the crummy that night. They'd got in beforehand, and we were in the crowning in. When I got on, I said, well, how did it go today? He said, well, Spears work okay, but Jackson no good. So Hugh Hodgins come along one day and out where we were falling, and he said, well, how are things going? I said, well, we're doing fine, everything. And he said, well, you know what, we got to hold on. He said, how would you like to take a contract to log here? I said, I don't want to get the log. And I said, I'm doing fine the way it is with the crew and no worries, no nothing. He said, look, Viv, he said, it's like this. He said, I've known you and known of you for years. And he said, I know your reputation right back to the days when you started with Fred Maddox's construction out of Calgary. He said, so I know a lot about you. And he says, it's just as simple as this. If we can't get the logs out of here, we don't need any fallers. And so, being crazy, I said, okay. They said, well, we'll give you the equipment. They had the caps there, and they had a coal decker there. And they said, you hire the crew, and you do everything, and we'll look after your payroll in Sandspit. You won't have any worries of that. So that was fine. And so I started in. So I got the brainy idea that I would put out a skidway. First, I got the longest slim tree or logs we could get that were about 18 inches on the butt or better, and laid them down and lashed them together, and we started making bundles, and made a bundle rack way about 300 feet above the beach, and laid skids all the way down across the highway, as they called it in those days, which was just 2 ruts, but there was still a highway which is paved today. So we laid these skids down, and then we made a bundling rack, and we logged continuously and make the bundles, put straps around them, and drop the posts, push them down with a cat in each end, down broadsides, down to just above the high tide line, leave them there, and keep logging, great. And then right at the right critical time, I built a skidway. At that same time, I built the skidway right out to the low water mark. And we had to dig dead men in to hold the skids down, the wooden skids. And this worked fine, except that it don't work in southeast gales because the logs working up and down, they soon bugger that all up. But the idea was fine. I proved that, because then we could put out 10 to 11 bundles with 2 cats. We could shove them out at the low water. Then we put a towing line over the top of each bundle and clamped it on. They clamped the bundle straps on with it onto the main tow line. And then when the tide come in, they folded it out and just told them, I've got pictures in there, into Alfred Bay, and then our production was really good because we could get it off. So me and Alfred Bay, so it was working pretty well. That was later in the year that year, and so I decided I had to have something better than that. For principle was good, but wood isn't the best thing to have bobbing around in salt chuck. So I come down to Vancouver, and there was an old junkyard out at East Hastings there, Active Trading, I think it was. And they had a bunch of paraffin booms off the sub chasers during the war. And as you know, they were large in the middle, and they tapered out to their mountings on each end. So I bought a bunch of them, shipped them up on the Union, and we made our skidway out with those paraffin booms. And so we laid them on the sand, and then we used wood above the high water, and then we got into production.
Yes.
We built the bundles, and they were able to shove them down, and we said with a cat could shove them down with 1 cat in the middle, but we preferred 2 because you could steer them better,
Yeah.
put them in faster. So the paraffin booms were the answer to the whole thing. And we got them out further, and we didn't have any trouble, and that's when we really got into logging.
And so in Alfred Bay, they made them up into Davis rafts?
They loaded them onto Davis rafts in Alfred Bay.
And where did they take them to then?
So, well, they went from Alfred Bay, the rafts went to Ocean Falls.
I sure enjoyed your story of using blasting powder to make a ditch for the boat, the Carolina Maria, to float on a high tide.
Well, that ditching powder become. Let's go back for a whole story of ditching powder. We were having a lot of trouble in that country. As you know, there's a lot of overburden and very wet, and you couldn't bulldoze a cat road. You couldn't get in, and then we'll get into the electric arch later because it was part of our do there too. But you go uphill, it's pretty hard to. All you can do is go up against the bank, drop the blade, and drag it back. And there was times when you just couldn't get anywhere, and water was the answer. So what I did is, there was a fellow come along, well, there was actually a compensation man, I can't think of his name at the time, come along, and he said, there's some new powder they got out now, they call it ditching powder, 50%. And he told me he'd been at a camp where they had used it, and he said, all you do is take a shovel handle and poke a hole about 12 inches or so apart, shove it down as far as you can. He said, drop 1 stick or 2 sticks and keep going. He said, and you only have to light 1 stick at the end. And he said, zip, and it's gone. He told me, he explained it, and I said, God, he said, where do you get this stuff? So I found out that they had it available. So the next time there was any chance of getting powder shipped in, well, I got a bunch of this ditching powder. And from then on, road building was about 10% of what it was before. That it was so wet in the Charlottes that it worked perfect. You'd go along, a couple of us, and we'd shove that handle down shovel handle as far as you could, shove it either 1 stick, 2 stick, 3 stick, depending on how much guts you had to do it. And you go along for a couple of 100 feet, 200 or 300 feet, and providing you didn't have too heavy limbs in between or something, and you set it off and bang, and the road was practically built because it got rid of all the overburden. And then, of course, if it quit, you didn't have any worries then. Wherever it quit, all you had to do was go down go a few feet ahead and put a stick with a primer in it and light it off and go again. So it become and I had gone, at that time was just when they started issuing blasting tickets. And I had ticket number 15 with the Workmen's Compensation Board, the first ones that, because Pacific Mills were insisted that I come down and get a blasting ticket for my operation, because they were doing the same with all theirs. And so I come down and I'd handled lots of powder in my day without a ticket, but anyway, I had to get this ticket, and at the end of that I had ticket number 15, and it disappeared sometime in our move at South Benny, and that's why I haven't got the ticket, but anyway, that's here irrelevant. So I had the ticket to do all this and everything else. Well, that's our road building.
You state in here that most of your crew turned out to be Indian in the long run, eh?
Well, yeah, you see, I knew the natives up in Charlotte, and they are good workers. They're one of the finest bunch of workers there are, which I proved later on. And I had my crew at one time were all Indian except for Art Lalonde, who was French Canadian, which is pretty close to an Indian, and David, my son, and myself. They were all, and they're typical. There's good and bad, but the most of them were very reliable and everything else. And the one thing about them there was that when fishing season come, there were some highline fishermen, and they fished. They had a fish boat, and they had it all ready to go. And when you knew when the fall, they'd tell you what day the next spring they were going to go fishing. It was just that pattern they followed, and which was fine. And these fellows, even later on, they keep you informed. So when they would go fishing, you picked up other young ones or hired men from town or whatever to get by. But when the fishing was over, as soon as the fishing was over, they were back to work for you. They were very reliable.
Well, in 1958, after 15 years in the Charlottes, you went to South Bendick, again with, Pacific Mills or...
Well, what it turned out there, they had a problem in South Bendick. They had the amalgamation of Canadian Western and Northern Pulp at one time, and so supers from there, they sent a super up, being with Canadian Western for years and everything, into South Bendick to run an isolated camp, and it didn't work. And so the cost was so high, something in the $90-some a thousand at that time. And I saw the cost sheets, so I know it to be true, and it was shown to me, and I saw it. So Hugh Hodgins come along one day again. He was up there, and he said, "We'd like you to go to South Bendick." And I can't think of the engineer's name, you know him well, but was with him. And so they said, "Can you come to Vancouver?" He said, "No, we'd like to fly you up to South Bendick." And I said, "Well, I don't really want to go to South Bendick. I like it here." And I got the same answer then as I got when they originally. He said, "Well, we don't need this." He said, if we leave you here, we have to lay off 3 other small contractors." And so this was the excuse. And I had the experience to go. So they asked me to go and have a look at South Bendick.
In your autobiography, that some of the finest fur you'd ever seen, eh?
Oh, it was beautiful, beautiful timber. But tough ground, a lot of steep.
This was a timber lease that...
Well, they were pulp leases.
They were pulp leases. Yeah. And this is the time... Wasn't this the time that you bought your Piper Club? Or did you have it before you left to Charlotte?
No, I had a Cessna. Originally, Charlotte's I had a small, and then I got a Johnny Boat EOK. It was his plane that he had that I bought with floats on it. That when I went to South Bendick, I'd already had it when I was in the Charlotte.
Oh, I see.
EOK.
You deserve a lot of credit for getting into aircraft, I would say, Viv. When was it that you went over and helped Bill Moore at the time that that tidal wave took him out? 64? Was it that late?
The spring of 64. We all had radio telephones, as you know, on the coast, and that was our lifeline. And so I'm sitting in the office early in the morning, and Barney Potts talking, and Bill was telling Barney about what had happened over the night. It was the first I knew that he'd had a problem like that.
With the tidal wave.
Tidal wave, and so I heard them talking, and he told me how bad it was, and so right away I called Bill open on the line, on the radio telephone, and I asked him about it, and I said, I'll be there in 2.5 hours. So I filled the helicopter with gas and took some spare gas with me, and I was there.
Well, Bill said you brought pike poles and boom chains and...
Well, not quite, but...
Everything.
He stretches it a little bit, but I took only what I could back on the helicopter.
Well, he appreciated it very much.
Oh, you have no idea. Unless you've been there, you know, there's the fact of seeing somebody like Bill that you can do something for in a time like that. I mean, nobody knows, except me, how valuable he thought it was to have somebody to come in. I come in there like I had to fly right across from South Benwick, across the pond there. And I was there in...
With the helicopter?
With the helicopter.
With the helicopter.
Yeah.
So you were...
So I got there, and right away, I landed, and I took Gerry, we packed 4-gallon cans of gas with us extra all the time for going anywhere, and I had lots of gas because I was alone in the helicopter, so I loaded it right up with extra cans, and I got there, and I sit down and talked to him, and we had a cup of coffee there, and I said, well, let's go and see well, we went and looked the whole thing over, and that one boat of his had gone with the water, and the weight of hell had gone back up in the winds. Things like that we picked out from the helicopter. He wouldn't have found them for God knows how.
No.
Well, looking at your own operation, it was called what? Williams Logging?
Williams Logging.
It was Spuzzum Creek, I believe.
Yes.
When did you start there, do you know?
In May of 1964. We moved, we had been logging at South Bentig Arm, and I was with Crown for 21 years total, working for them and contracting for them. And left Crown and took the contract at Spuzzum with Rayonier, which was considered to be a 25-year contract there at the time, which comprised of the old CPR timber berth and timber sale. And I would say that at the time that I got the contract with Rayonier, that was considered to be the first 25-year contract a contractor ever got from a major company as an independent.
Well, yeah, because most of these contracts today, they're almost year to year, aren't they?
Well, in those days, in many cases, it wasn't a contract. It was really a letter. If you ever got the letter, it was all on promises. You talked it over, made a deal with one of the management people, and everybody was considered to be honorable in those days, and we back it up to a degree. But every time that the management changed,
you had to get a new agreement, or a new contract.
Yes, and another major item of that contract was the logs at that time basically had to be put into the river. And so we built a lift-off dump that would lift 100 ton at the Fraser, and used all off-highway logs down to the Fraser. And the problem of scale was always in everybody's mind, mainly in the contractor, because you start the usual way of handling that was that the logs would go down, and eventually the major company would get them into a booming ground wherever, and then scale them, and they'd scale what was left if there was any left. And so I decided that that wasn't really very beneficial to me, that if I did all the work and put them in the river, I want somebody else to take the responsibility. So I negotiated a deal after quite a long time with them that all those logs would be scaled on the truck as they were put on the truck before they were put in the water, which according to our forestry contracts was what it says in there, that they shall be scaled before they leave the area.
And from Spuzzum down the river, were they taken down in bag booms, or were they loose?
No, there was no way you could bag boom them around. You just put bundle for bundle in the river with 2 straps on them.
Oh yeah.
Two steel or wire rope straps, and you'd let them go, and they just drifted down the river. And Rivtow, the Kester brothers first, and Rivtow picked them up just below Hope at Hunter Creek. They had a catch boom down there, and they caught all the bundles or anything else that come down the river.
Were these bundles helped down the river at all with boats or anything?
No,
just on
they
their
just
own?
let them come, and over the low water, some of the odd ones would hang up, but then in the freshet season come along the next year, they would go down. And the argument was always how much you would lose in the river. And over the period of the years, 10 years, we put bundles in the river before we turned to highway haul. Actually was less than 1% of shrinkage in the logs. So it really, there was very little loss of those bundles.
Well, 1%, you can almost lose that much out of a flat boom during the tow.
Well, more, because at least these logs were tied together, and the straps were strong enough that they sit up on the rocks. If anybody that traveled a highway up through the canyon after the freshet season, one year you'd see a bundle sitting practically standing on end on a rock, and the next time they'd quite likely get washed off. Chathuis were putting in a lot way further up Williams Lake and the Gang Ranch area, different areas, which I'm not sure where they put them in. But they did a lot of logging in the interior, where Allen, Chathui, and Cattermole were all up.
Well, were there any of these other bundles in the river at the same time as yours?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, they're all stamped.
So you could identify the different
well,
bundles.
you see, all the logs have a log stamp on them. And then later on, when they finished Highway 7 through, then we started to haul into where Bowman's Mill is today, where the log sorting is.
Is that when that highway was finished in 74?
It would be around that area.
And that's when you stopped the bundling.
Yeah. You see, we hauled also, Rayonier owned the Alaska Pine Mill in New Westminster, and they wanted logs of a certain size in the mill there, and it was difficult to sort them and get them to the mill, except putting a lot of logs in the water and then hoping to get them sorted. So we hauled 120 miles to the mill from Spuzzum, and that was when I experimented with the first triaxle trailer on the logging truck that let us go to 120,000 pounds.
How many sides would you have had operating then?
We had four and 5 steel spars, mostly 4.
You had a 25-year contract, but did your logging last that long?
Yes, it did. I put in 15 years and then sold out.
Is that you, like your outfit, plowing the road?
I had 2 of them. See, in order to get open in the spring, we got so much snow up there, I had 2 of these thicker snow blowers. And we used to go up in February, March and start blowing roads, you see. And then sure we get snow back again, but then we were able to get going at least a month earlier up in those higher levels because of that.
I don't quite understand that. Dad said that he plowed his roads off a couple of years, but he found that he could get the roads open, but then the rigging crew would stumble around the snow out in the bush. So
Well, that's yes and no. You see, the trouble is you're going through miles and miles of logged off country, and you will have so much snow on those roads.
Yeah.
And yet in the timber and where your logging is, the snow will all be gone, but that snow will stay till in June.
Timber, 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 o'er the mountains high, timber, down the canyon wide, timber, let me rove and ride through timber, timber, when the day is done, by the campfire's gleam, timber, let me lie and dream of timber. Tall timbers calling, and the echoes ring. All nature sings a song along the timber trail. Blue shadows falling down the canyon vale. The whispering pines entwine along the timber trail. High in the sky above, the love song of the trees will blend and wend its way out on the breeze. Tall timbers calling, and the echoes ring. All nature sings a song along the timber trail. The mountains high, down the canyon wide, let me rove and ride through timber, when the day is done, by the campfire's gleam, let me lie and dream of timber. Tall timbers calling, and the echoes ring. All nature sings a song along the timber trail. Blue shadows falling down the canyon vale. The whispering pines entwine along the timber trail. Timber, timber,